Okay. Here we go with Wichita. Did I pretty much get through these guys? No? Did I just introduce them? And by the way, I love this statue here, but the fact these guys are on horseback is totally wrong. These, just like the Caddo, were a part of the Mississippian culture, and as the Mississippian culture started to degrade and disintegrate, they left from the Arkansas River, coming to the Red River and down as far as the Trinity. So these were the guys that were living around where Dallas is, as well as out to Wichita Falls. In their councils, they actually had women participating in it. And basically their job is they acted as the middlemen in trade between the Lipan Apaches and later on the Comanches and the Caddos and Cranquas. Ready to go to the next slide? Oh, and in case you guys didn't notice, I did make the kind of abbreviated slides, so you can print those out if you want to. Make sure you're getting two to a page. I think she's got an example of them. The Pueblo. One of the Pueblo had built a huge culture out near Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then for some reason in the 14th century, around the 1300s, it just started disappearing. I mean, they had huge trade centers like Pueblo Bonito and Chaco Canyon that were just abandoned. And one of the groups of these, the Humanos, made their way all the way to El Paso, where of course they had to use irrigation and everything, lived in adobe huts. And basically they had to build expensive trade networks to make sure that they got the food they needed. And basically their huge, big kind of area they had out in West Texas, that was pretty much encroached upon by the Lipan Apaches, especially as the Comanches came pouring south and were pushing them out of their lands. Ready? All right, now the old world outreach. Problem, myth, who came over here first? There's all these different rumors and everything, all these different powers that came over here. I mean, some people say that the Bermuda Triangle is where Atlantis was. We actually did find ancient Chinese anchors in San Francisco Harbor, so we know that they actually did come over here. But guys, we're not really concerned about those people. Why? Because we want to look at who came over here and actually stayed and kind of made a little difference. European outreach in the age of exploration. Now guys, the Europeans had wanted to travel and explore farther. The only problem is they didn't have the technology. First people that actually did have that technology were the Viking Empire. Basically, if you want to think about a bunch of motorcycle riders, these were the guys that did it. They built longboats that were surprisingly very long, and they didn't have to have that deep of a keel because they were so long, which allowed them to sail in the ocean as well as in the rivers of Europe. And basically they'd stop, they'd plunder a monastery and take all the gold, take all the food, and get out. Well, during 860, one of their ships gets blown off course, and the sailors come back with, hey, we think we saw an island out there. Well, they did see an island, and that was Iceland, which they started colonizing in 870. Well, then Eric the Red, kind of a real estate guy, kind of like Stephen F. Austin was here in Texas, he goes a little bit further west and he discovers Greenland. Now guys, Iceland hadn't been named Iceland, and Greenland hadn't been named Greenland. It was Eric the Red that named both those places. Now why do you think he named Iceland Iceland and Greenland Greenland? Well, where do you want to live, guys? Do you want to live in a land of ice? Or do you want to live in a land of green? Most people, it's a real estate game. Most people want to live in, even though Greenland is actually less hospitable than Iceland. He was trying to get people to move there so he could make more money off the land. Well, time goes on, and in 986, another Viking ship is blown off course. And they see land over here in modern-day Canada. Well, not the son of Eric the Red, but a descendant of Eric the Red, named of all things Leif Erik's son, goes ahead and comes over here, and he starts a colony at Lanzo Meadow, right out there in Newfoundland, in 1001. And they pay for like blacksmiths to come over, they pay for they spend a lot of money. And they say, hey, we're going to come back with even more people to help populate this place. And they go back to Norway. The only problem is, this happens right at the point when the Viking Empire is starting to collapse upon itself. Clans fighting clans. Basically, he can't get back till 13 years later in 1014, and he finds the place totally abandoned. Well, then why are we talking about him? Well, because even though he was only there for a short while, for the short time that they were there, they did change the balance of power in that area. And what happened to the Vikings that moved there? Basically, they moved into the woods and interbred with Native Americans. They got what the French would call un cul du bois, a heart of the woods. You ready? Oh, by the way, you know what the French call a hangover? Un tête de bois, a head of wood. So, when do we really take a huge leap forward? Because like I told you, Europeans were always interested, but Europe was kind of stuck in the Dark Ages. Now you know why it's called the Dark Ages? Anybody? And I'm kind of answering questions for you because I know our time is limited. The reason why it was called the Dark Ages is because people in Europe, basically Greece and Rome, had done all this scientific thinking and advancements and stuff like that. And basically during the Dark Ages, it was more important to survive the day-to-day than continue the journey of knowledge. So they kind of fell into the dark. The Muslims, meanwhile, hadn't. They had continued the knowledge that the Greeks and Romans, and had carried on with it. And because of the Crusades, Europe is hit in the face with how backwards they are. I mean, the Muslims are advanced in architecture, in medicine, in math. And of course, once you realize how backwards you are, you don't want to stay that way. You don't want to be stuck with an Atari 2600 if you're introduced to a PS4. And if these guys are going to war, guys, war takes a lot of resources. You need a lot of money because you need a lot of weapons, you need a lot of armor, etc., so on. And the way you're going to be able to get all those resources is you've got to form a nation state. Now we're going to talk about 3 nations that do this during this time. France, they were able to unify underneath Louis the 11th. In England, after more than 100 years of civil war, they unify underneath Henry Tudor. The War of the Roses. Oh, and by the way, guys, the War of the Roses in England is basically what Game of Thrones is based on. in Spain, you have the Reconquista. Because in Spain, they didn't have to go all the way to the Middle East to fight the Muslims, because the Muslims had taken over most of the Iberian Peninsula. So they started what is known as the Reconquista. And the biggest moment in the Reconquista was when King Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, these two groups, got married to each other, joining their families and lands. And the Reconquista is finally complete in 1492, when the last Moorish stronghold at Granada, when that's captured. And then even though they do take some small islands and stuff like that, once they got them out of the Iberian Peninsula, it's pretty much, we done what God wants us to do. And of course, the way that they were going to go and assimilate the people who lived in these lands that had been Moorish or the Muslim is they used the mission system to not only teach these guys about God, but these are the clothes we wear, this is how we farm, this is our language. That they would then turn around and try to replicate in the new world. Now remember, while Spain's doing all this fighting and trying to kick out the Moors, there's one country over here that got its freedom. Does anybody know what the name of this other country on the Iberian Peninsula is? It's the language they speak in Brazil. Portugal. And in Portugal, because they're not having to support this huge military machine, underneath the guy, his name isn't up there. So you got to write down this guy's name because it's very important. Prince Henry the Navigator. Basically, he focuses his country's treasure on maritime exploration. He's a huge supporter of it. I mean, he opens up a school, an observatory in Lisbon, bringing in like the latest maritime technology. His sailors there studied cartography. Now, what's cartography? Anybody know what cartography is?
The study of like mountains and hills, right?
Kinda. That's topography. So it's got something to do with that. Anybody here use GPS when they drive? You're using your phone or whatever to do cartography. Makes maps. Map making. Now, why would he have his guys study map making? Why would he have his sailors study map making? Well, young lady, I'll use you to explain. What's a town you've never been in before? You ever been to Wichita Falls? No, she's never been there. Ain't no problem. Anyway, you go there on the lark. And you're kind of in the middle of downtown and everything like that. It's about 11 o'clock at night. I don't know why you do it, but you go up to an ATM and you hit the withdrawal key. And it's like, how much? Like, huh? $400 daily max. You got $400. Are you going to want to know how to get back to that ATM? Yeah. How are you going to be able to do that? To make a map. Guys, his sailors, they're exploring. And they're exploring to find trade points. Hey, I'm going to buy cinnamon from you. I'm going to get silver from you. Going to trade gold with you. And he keeps pushing exploration further and further southward down Africa. Now, why is he doing that? And if you kids don't answer me this, I'm going to be so sad because nobody in the other class knew this.
Why is he exploring further?
Yeah, why does he keep trying south on Africa? Marco! Nobody played that game when they were a kid in the pool?
Polo.
Then Marco Polo. Marco Polo was a guy. Who was his dad? He was a teenager. He was 14 years old in 1271. They go to the merchants of Venice and they say, hey, we're going to go to Asia. Give us money so we can buy trade goods and everything like that. We're going to go out there and get all these trade goods and bring them back to Venice. So he got a lot of backers that supported him. Look, they did it mainly a lot by land. It took them 24 years to get out there and back. Indeed, he arrived 1 week before his wagon trains that were loaded with like silks and trade goods that Europe had never seen before. And he told them about what they had. You know, all these guys, they loaned him a lot of money. And here he is coming back by himself. He's like, no, I got it. They're like, yeah, right. They throw him in jail until the wagon trains arrived with all this stuff on it. They made tons of money, bringing back the treasures and mysteries of the Orient. So why do you think Prince Henry the Navigator is doing what he's doing with ships? Why is he trying to use ships? Because guys, if you can get around Africa, bang, zoom. You are totally open to the markets of Asia. And if you use a boat, what are the benefits of using a boat? You can carry more, it's quicker. Also, you don't have to stop at every single kingdom and city, hey, I want to go through your town because I want to get over there. She'd say, okay, give me $50. What? I'm not getting, hey, if you don't want to pay me the $50, all right, here's your $50. Then I get there, hey, how's it going, Liz? I want to get over there. Let me get through your end. Okay, pay me $75. What? Yeah, $75. Oh, well, if you don't like it, go back through her. Oh, you're going to have to pay her $50. Okay, here's. And basically it's going to reduce tolls and everything like that. And streamline the trade. And so as he's continuing to press south, they make connections with like the Azores, the Canaries, Madeira. And now near the Gambia River, they come across the Songhai Empire, an African empire. A rather large African empire. Oh, and by the way, guys, in case you didn't know, I'd recommend that you print out those cheat sheets because I think it makes note-taking easier. I don't know, does it? Ready to go? Now, who were the Songhai? Like I said, they were a huge, here's the empire right here, but guys, they had trade routes all over Western Africa. They had trade centers, they had education centers. Their chief trade goods were like cinnamon, gold. Oh, and also, these were big-time slave traders. They would basically trade the cinnamon and gold for rifles and weapons. So they could go into the East and Central Africa and capture more fellow Africans and bring them back for sale. And they offered Portugal, they said, hey, you want slaves? And Portugal at that time said, nah, because they really didn't have a use for it. But they remembered, hey, that's a trading opportunity. Because the Portuguese were big into trade. Ready for the next one? And then it finally happens. On February 3rd, 1488, Bartolomeo Diaz circumnavigates the Cape of Good Hope, the very southernmost tip of Africa. And by 1498, Vasco da Gama, one of their sailors, had set up trade centers in like India, Japan, China. And Portugal started making a lot of money. And guess who was grating their teeth this whole time? Who was still fighting the Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula?
Europeans?
No, well, which Europeans? Which European country? We had Portugal here. Everything was cool because this other country was doing all the fighting. Who was that other country? Starts with an S. S-P. Spain! Spain was like, for Spain it didn't make sense. Why? Because Spain was doing God's work. They were doing God's will. They were fighting against the Muslims. They were kicking, and God, instead of blessing Spain for doing what they thought God wanted them to do, they're blessing Portugal. I can't believe that. What the heck's going on? Well, like I said, nature, economics detests a vacuum. So Spain, England, and France all start to seek routes to Asia, utilizing the latest in maritime technology, like the compass that they got from, or the lodestone, that they got from China, or the astrolabe that they got from the Arabs. Basically, just told them how far north or south of the equator they were. Didn't have anything yet to say how far east-west. All right. Then comes Spain's explorer, an Italiano from Genoa, the Genoese dreamer, known as Cristoforo Colombo. Christopher Columbus believed the world wasn't flat. A lot of people back then actually didn't believe the world was flat. But he had actually gone and he had found some of the old Greek writings of a mathematician named Ptolemy who had figured out that the world was actually round. How did he figure it out? By taking the shadow of a tree. I don't know, don't ask me. And he built a whole, and he figured out the world was round. Well, the only problem though is, what happens sometimes if you make a mistake in a math problem?
The whole thing is wrong.
Yeah, the whole thing's wrong. And for his calculations, the world was only about 2/3 as big as it actually was. So all of this landmass right here didn't exist under this guy, who this guy totally believed in. Totally. So in 1492, guess what the first country he approached was? What country had been spending big bucks on maritime exploration? Starts with a P. Portugal. He goes to Portugal. He says, hey, love me, baby. Look, I can get you going there west. And Portugal, that had spent a lot of money on maritime exploration by this time, they were like, hey, listen, Chris, thanks, but no thanks. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Love you. Bye. And Christopher Columbus was like, oh, man. Because he needed, someone was going to have to buy the ships, someone was going to have to paint. And so, well, he goes to the kingdom that's right next door to tell them about, hey, I've got this whole idea that we can reach Asia by sailing west. Now, to Ferdinand and Isabella, this guy seems like an answer to prayer. Remember, they were the ones that were doing God's work. And it seemed like God hadn't been blessing them, and all of a sudden, here's God's answer. So they go ahead and they pay to support his expedition. Now, have any of you guys been to a Corpus Christi? Have you seen the little pinta they got there? No, Santa Maria. It's underneath the causeway as you're going out to the USS Lexington. Before you go over the causeway, you pull over and you walk down. There's a little, totally built to size replica of the Santa Maria. And little thing. But that was big money back then. And they send him over here. Sure enough, he discovers land at Hispaniola, believing that he had reached Asia. It's not until like 20 years later that another explorer is doing exploration. Another explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, is exploring off of South America, and he's kind of looking at his maps and he says, this ain't Asia. And he sends his maps back to the best cartographers, which were in Germany. Back then they used to put Terra Incognito, where it was unknown lands, draw little monsters and everything like that. And because this land didn't have a name yet, they gave it the name of its explorer. And that's why today we live in the United States of Vespucci. Now America. See what I did there? You kids. But that is how this continent got called America. Amerigo Vespucci. Ready for the next one? England, of course, they started pushing exploration. You know, Spain's doing all this stuff down here. In England, which was not a very strong country back then, we'll just go up here. Now, why do you think England was all the way up here as opposed to down here? Because basically they knew that Spain would kick their butt, because Spain had claimed everything. So they're just, hey, we're right over here. France, they're a little bit braver underneath Giovanni de Varanzo. They were much further south. They even started Fort Augustine down in Florida. And as soon as Spain found out, they came, took it over, and said, thank you very much. Ready for the next one? Now guys, we basically start to get a new transatlantic world. As you can guess, warfare amongst the native increases because they want to get closer to the Europeans. Why? Because the Europeans were welcomed at first as trading partners, as political allies. Now why would you want to know me who could give you a steel knife? Why would you want that so bad? Well, Native Americans had knives, but theirs was made out of rock. This is made out of steel. So I say, okay, give me 5 beaver pelts, which she does. And she's like, what an idiot. I gave this guy 5 beaver pelts for that blade. And I'm thinking, what an idiot. I just gave her, and I got these 5. And what are you going to do with that knife?
Do I have the steel one? Or
You got the steel one. You got the one you got from me. Nice knife. What are you going to do?
I'm going to go replicate it.
You can't. You can't. You can't. You don't know how to. So what are you going to do?
I'll sell it at a higher price.
Huh?
Sell it at a higher price.
Yeah, she's going to turn around. That's her buddy pal. That's her ally tribe. She's going to say, hey, I'm going to give you this knife. I'll give it to you for 10 beaver pelts. And you're like, whoa, 10 beaver pelts? That's it? All right, you give that to her. Then when I come again, she says, oh, I got 15 beaver pelts for you. So now I give her 3 knives. So now you go, oh, and by the way, you turn around and trade that knife to her for 15 beaver pelts. Making the money. Ready for the next one? Now, of course, as soon as Spain believes that they've found a way to Asia, Portugal, hey, that's no fair. Indeed, these 2 countries almost went to war, but in came Pope Alexander IV. Was like, all right, boys, stop fighting, stop fighting. He came out with the Treaty of Tordesillas. First one was in 1493. The second one was in 1494. Basically, it set a line 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands, and everything west of that line belonged to Spain. Everything east of that line belonged to Portugal. So Portugal could keep all its trade spots in Africa and India, in Asia. And basically Spain got all of North and South America, except for this little itty bitty sliver. Because they had no idea what the land was over there. And that was the beginnings of Brazil. And that's why Brazil, the largest country in South America, speaks Portuguese. You all ready for the next one? And like I said, Alamo Draft House is going to be reopening this weekend. Are you going to get the attendance and something? So go out, have some fun. So Spain's policy for the New World possessions. Basically, kind of the historical way to look at it is Spain was after the 3 G's. God, gold, and glory. He came over here, he tried to save the people, introduce them to God. It's okay if you get the gold, because God kind of gave you this land. And hey, if you spread the glory of the king, as well as yourself, ain't nothing wrong with that. The first guy that actually tried this was Columbus, who once again, like I told you, totally believed he was in Asia. He made 3 more voyages over here. He asked, oh, and by the way, the king worked out a deal with him where because he discovered the New World, Columbus and his family were supposed to get a 10th of all the goods that were brought over here from the Old World to Spain. Indeed, his family is still suing the king for royalty for their 10th that they never received. Basically, he got his own colony called La Natividad on Hispaniola, and he didn't work the Native Americans to death. He tried to keep them growing what they used to grow, and needless to say, there's not that much money in like bananas and stuff like that, so Spain kind of becomes disinterested in it. And then people that were jealous of Columbus started whispering in the king's ear, man, Christopher Columbus, he's keeping all the gold for himself. Watch this next boat that comes back, it's only going to have potatoes on it. Well, they didn't grow potatoes, but... And the king would be like, no, and then come back and there'd only be potatoes on it. Oh, you're right. And so basically they, on August 19th, 1498, he's dragged back to Spain in chains, and he dies totally impoverished in a jail. Like I told you, his family is still suing for their partition of the royal 10th. Ready for the next one? Then we have Hernando Cortez, a guy in total unbridled ambition, who was there when there's this huge turn in Spanish policy, where baby, it's for the gold. In 1511, he was there side by side with Diego Valadez as his right-hand man, because Diego Valadez was a general who was on an expedition to take over Cuba. They're victorious, and so he becomes the right-hand man to Governor Valadez, taking bribes, breaking laws, all the while smiling to Valadez. And in 1518, rumors start to drift in by a sailor named Juan de Rivera about this really wealthy empire in the interior of Spain, near modern-day Veracruz. Ready? So on February 19th, 1519, early in the morning, before the sun has even come up, and his men leave Santiago de Cuba with 600 men and 60 horses. Now you know why he left so early in the morning? Because basically there was a warrant out for his arrest. He had pulled too many fast ones, and he was going to be arrested. He heard about it, and he knew he had to hustle buck. He had absolutely no legitimacy to do what he was doing at all. And he goes and he lands near modern day Veracruz, and the very first thing he does is burn all his ships down to the water line. Now, why did he burn all his ships to the water line? There's no way for them to get away. Why did he do that? Because, guys, the cops were after him. And he had to hide evidence of where he was. Okay? Even though some people, no, we did it so men, we must do it or die trying. He was worried about getting captured and taken back to Cuba. He learns of the Aztecs. They take him into their capital city at Tenochtitlan. He's never seen a city that huge, so clean, so much gold. The only deal is, they've got a lot of men. And he's vastly outnumbered. Well, anyway, what happens is the Aztecs they have a huge military because Montezuma, who's their emperor, in the middle of a military procession, he has the army turn around and attack the Spaniards. They have to fight their way back. There's 7 canals in the city that they've raised all the gates to. By the time they escape, there's only like 200 and something men, 260 men, and 2 horses. And these guys are supposed to turn around and take over the Aztecs. What do? They go to all the people, because basically the Aztecs, this huge empire, had taken over all these little kingdoms and chiefdoms by saying, join us or die. And so they joined them, but they'd say, okay, you're going to give us 10 bushels of parrot feathers every year, and we're going to take 10 of your citizens, because they're going to be given to us to sacrifice. And of course, once a year they'd have this huge called the War of the Flowers, where one side would have one flower in their head, the other side would have another flower. They'd take like cudgels and they'd just beat the other side into submission. And you know what happened to the side that won the war? Well, they'd be sacrificed first, because God loves a winner. They'd still kill the losers, but that's kind of like leftovers, you know. But anyway, they got alliances with all these other groups, and they turn around and they were able to take over the Aztecs, getting vast, untold wealth. Which started inspiring other people, hey, let's go see if we can replicate this. Like Juan Ponce de Leon, who was the Spanish governor of Puerto Rico. And he learned that if you work the natives to death, they'll die. So he had to get more laborers. So he went on a travel and he discovered Florida. And once in Florida, he wasn't in there looking for the fountain of youth. He was in there looking for more Indian slaves. And basically he got killed because the Indians said, no, we don't want to be slaves. We don't like you. And basically his expedition goes back. Well, because the people there were fighting so viciously, that kind of proved to other Spaniards that, well, hey, there must be gold up there. So you had other expeditions go off, but I guess we'll talk about this next time, and I guess we'll push the quiz back to like Wednesday. Sound like a plan? Then y'all can have an incredible weekend. And celebrate the fact that you're alive and that COVID ain't got you yet. Thank you so much. Do you want to turn on the mic? Thank you so much.